Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Okay, so today we're looking into something pretty wild. Doge,
Oh, wow.
and no, not the meme coin.
Right.
We're talking about the Department of Government Efficiency Doge,
Okay.
which is something Elon Musk is heading up,
Hmm.
and which President Trump is totally on board with.
Interesting.
And the main idea with all this is to find savings in the government and then send 20% of that right back to taxpayers as DOGE dividend checks.
DOGE dividend checks.
Yeah.
Wow. Sounds pretty out there.
It does. We're working with some reporting from The Independent to break this all down.
I'm intrigued.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting stuff.
So sending checks to people.
Yeah, essentially a dividend on your tax dollars.
Huh.
I mean, it sounds almost too good to be true on the surface.
Yeah, you have to wonder where exactly these savings are supposed to come from.
For sure.
And then what the consequences might be if they actually did it.
Well, Trump seems pretty excited about it.
Yeah.
He was talking about it at an investment conference down in Miami, kept saying things like billions and even hundreds of billions in potential savings.
Wow.
And he even said, I'm quoting here, we're thinking of giving 20% back to the American citizens and 20% to pay back debt, pay down debt.
Okay, so using another 20% to pay down the debt.
Right.
Which makes you wonder, where does that other 60% go?
Right.
The proposal doesn't really say.
Yeah, that's one of those details we're going to have to keep in mind as we go through all this.
Definitely.
But you can't really talk about DOGE without bringing up Elon Musk.
True.
It really seems like he's been given a lot of freedom to just scrutinize all the federal programs, to look for places to make cuts.
Right. So Trump currently said, go ahead, Elon, go through the whole budget and find what we can cut.
Yeah, basically.
But, and this is interesting, there are these mixed messages coming from the White House.
Oh.
Where they're saying that, yeah, sure, Musk can point out places that need improvement.
Okay.
But that he doesn't have any actual power to make decisions.
So he's like a consultant.
Yeah, but not like the one in charge.
I see, I see. But then if Musk is finding all these billions in potential savings, but he's not the one making the cuts,
Yep.
then who is?
Exactly.
Like, who is making the final calls?
It's something we need to look into, for sure.
Because the proposal itself doesn't really answer that.
Yeah, it really shows how we need more clarity on how this DOGE thing is supposed to actually work.
Yeah, for sure.
Who has the authority? And then how are those decisions being made?
Good questions. Important questions.
Really fundamental questions.
Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty here.
Sure.
Like, has DOGE actually found all these billions in savings that Trump keeps talking about? I mean, we're talking about sending checks to millions and millions of people.
Yeah, where's the money going to come from?
Right.
Good question.
Well, this is where things get more complicated.
Okay.
So Musk, he set this big goal of finding $2 trillion in savings.
Wow.
But we have to look at what Jessica Riedel is saying about this.
Oh, right.
She's a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute.
Uh-huh.
And she paints a different picture.
Yeah, I remember reading her take on all this.
Right.
She doesn't think much of the DOGE idea.
She's the one who said the DOGE checks would barely cover half a coffee at Starbucks.
Yeah.
Which, that's kind of eye-opening.
Really puts it in perspective.
It makes you wonder, what's even the point if the savings are so tiny?
Yeah, good point.
So Riedel, she's pretty skeptical, and she says that so far DOGE has only found something like $4 billion in potential cuts.
$4 billion.
Yeah, which is
Wow.
a tiny amount compared to $2 trillion.
Right.
Especially considering that the current budget deficit is already $2 trillion.
Yeah.
So her point is, even if they find these relatively small savings, it makes more sense to use that money to chip away at the national debt rather than funding these checks.
Makes sense.
It does make sense from like a big picture perspective.
Yeah.
But I can see how some people might feel let down.
Yeah, if they were expecting more.
Especially after all the hype. So it's like short-term reward versus long-term responsibility.
Right. And it's important to understand those trade-offs.
Absolutely. Okay, so $4 billion, it's basically nothing compared to that $2 trillion goal.
Yeah.
So how could they even come close to that?
Well, to reach $2 trillion in savings, you'd probably have to make huge cuts to some really major government programs.
Like what?
Like Medicare.
Oh, wow.
And Medicaid.
Really?
Yeah, maybe even the Department of Defense.
I mean, those are massive programs.
Absolutely.
Affecting so many people.
Right. And any cuts to those would have major consequences.
I'm starting to see why Riedel is so skeptical.
Uh-huh.
I mean, cutting programs like that, it's such a political gamble.
Yeah, you're talking about healthcare,
right?
Social safety nets, national security. It's not something you do lightly.
Absolutely. And I imagine the political backlash would be massive.
It would be.
The other option, of course, would be to just raise taxes a lot.
Which, I mean,
Which would be controversial, too.
huge backlash.
Yeah.
I mean, either way.
It's looking more and more like it would be super difficult to reach those huge savings without causing major problems.
I think so.
Yeah, it seems like every option has major downsides.
For sure.
It feels like we're getting into some pretty murky waters here.
Yeah.
On the one hand, you have this promise of DOGE dividends.
Which sounds appealing.
It does.
At first.
Right. But then on the other hand, you have all these experts like Rita basically saying, be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, it's a lot to figure out.
It really is.
Yeah.
Maybe we should try to simplify things a bit.
Okay.
Can you break down the arguments for and against DOGE dividends?
I can try.
Right.
So starting with arguments in favor, I mean, on a basic level, the idea of returning government savings to taxpayers,
Yeah.
it has a certain appeal.
It does.
It connects with this idea of giving people more control.
Right, and holding the government accountable for wasteful spending.
Exactly.
It's like that whole taxation with representation thing.
Uh-huh.
If the government's going to take our money, they better be using it wisely.
Yeah.
If they save any, well, we should get some of that back.
It taps into that desire for fairness.
Yeah, and honestly, who doesn't like getting extra cash?
I know I do.
Right.
And especially if it's framed as a dividend.
Right. Makes it seem like a return on an investment.
Exactly, instead of just a handout.
Okay, but you said there were arguments against it too.
Yes, and they're just as important to think about.
Okay.
Critics of DOGE dividends, people like Riedel,
Yeah.
they say that any savings, even small ones, should be used to pay down the debt. They point out that with the deficit already so high and only going to get higher,
Yeah.
giving out checks to people is irresponsible.
It's like using a squirt gun to put out a forest fire.
Ooh, that's a good one.
I mean, every little bit helps, but it's not going to solve the problem.
Exactly.
And then there's the question of how they're even achieving these savings.
Right.
If it's by cutting essential programs like Medicare and Medicaid,
Yeah,
then you're bringing in all these ethical and social concerns.
for sure.
I mean, how do you balance being fiscally responsible
Yeah,
with protecting the people who need help the most?
tough question.
It feels like a no-win situation.
It does.
And even if they could somehow find all these savings without gutting those programs,
Yeah,
there's still the question of if it's even sustainable.
right.
Can you really fix long-term problems with a one-time cash infusion?
That's what the critics are saying?
Yeah, they're calling DOGE dividends a Band-Aid solution.
They say we need bigger changes.
Not just a quick fix.
Right, we need systemic reforms.
I see. It's definitely more complicated than it seems at first glance.
It really is.
There's economics and politics and ethics.
It's all connected.
Yeah, we're really starting to see all the different sides of this.
We're just scratching the surface.
Yeah, there's so much more to unpack.
There's always more.
And it's what makes these conversations so interesting.
I agree.
So I think we've done a good job starting to peel back the layers.
Yeah, I think so.
And I have a feeling there's a lot more to come as we keep digging into this whole DOGE dividend thing.
Definitely.
Definitely. Okay, so we've talked about the economics of this whole DOGE dividend thing and, the big picture arguments for and against it.
Right.
But there's another layer we haven't really gotten into yet.
What's that?
The politics of it all.
Yeah, you can't really talk about DOGE without talking about the political side of things.
It's true.
You have Trump, who always loves pushing policies that put money back in people's pockets.
Right. It's a good look.
And then you have Musk, who's all about shaking things up.
It's like a power couple.
Yeah.
They both know how to get attention.
For sure.
But I have to ask, what do you think their motivation is with these DOGE dividends?
It's tough to say, for sure.
Yeah.
But it's worth thinking about the political benefits for them.
Okay.
Imagine this. Checks with the president's signature on them.
Oh, wow.
Showing up in mailboxes all across the country.
Right.
Right, when lawmakers are fighting over those tax cuts.
And trying to figure out how to manage the debt.
Exactly.
I mean, that's a pretty powerful image.
It is, and it could definitely sway public opinion.
It's like a tangible reminder that the government is doing something.
Even if the checks are small.
Right, even if it doesn't make a huge difference in people's lives.
It's still a gesture.
You mentioned tax cuts.
Yeah.
It seems like there might be some conflict between those and these DOGE dividends.
There could be.
I mean, how can they cut taxes and give people money at the same time?
It's a good question.
Where's the money supposed to come from?
Well, the House Republicans, they've put out this budget proposal.
Yeah.
That includes $4.5 trillion in new deficits from tax cuts.
Okay.
Plus $2 trillion in cuts to things like Medicare and Medicaid and food assistance.
So it's like they want to spend more and make less at the same time.
It seems that way.
How does that even work?
Well, a lot of economists are saying it doesn't.
Okay.
They're saying you can't cut taxes and spend more and expect to reduce the deficit.
Right. It's like trying to save money by spending more.
Yeah, it doesn't really add up.
Can you explain how this deficit spending works?
Sure.
And why everyone's so worried about it?
So basically, deficit spending happens when the government spends more than it takes in
Okay.
through taxes and other stuff.
Right.
So to cover the difference, they borrow money,
Uh-huh.
which adds to the national debt.
I see.
Now, a little bit of deficit spending can be okay.
Okay.
especially when the economy's struggling.
So it's like a tool.
Yeah, but if it keeps happening,
It becomes a problem.
a big problem.
Like what kind of problem?
Well, first, it can make it harder for businesses to invest
Okay.
because when the government borrows a lot of money, interest rates go up.
Makes sense.
So it becomes more expensive to borrow money.
For everyone.
Yeah, businesses and regular people.
So it slows the whole economy down.
Right? It's like a chain reaction.
Wow.
Second, a big national debt makes it harder for the government to deal with unexpected problems.
Like a recession.
Yeah, or a natural disaster.
Okay.
When those things happen, the government usually borrows more money.
To help people out.
Yeah, but if they're already in a lot of debt.
They don't have much wiggle room.
Exactly. It's like maxing out your credit cards right before something expensive happens.
Ouch.
And then third, this big debt becomes a burden on future generations.
Right, because eventually it has to be paid back.
Yeah, and if it keeps growing.
It could mean higher taxes for our kids.
Or less government services.
It's not just about right now, it's about the future, too.
Exactly.
So these DOGE dividends,
Yeah.
they might seem good in the short term, but they could be making these economic problems even worse.
That's the argument.
And that's why people like Riedel say any savings should go toward paying down the debt.
Right, it's more responsible.
And more sustainable.
Exactly.
Okay, so we know deficit spending is a big deal.
Yeah.
But let's go back to the politics of this whole thing.
Okay.
You said these DOGE checks could be a way for Trump to get people to like him, but wouldn't Congress have to approve them?
They would.
I mean, the president can't just send out checks whenever he wants, right?
He can't. He needs Congress to sign off on it.
And that's where things could get really interesting.
I think so.
Imagine the fights that could happen.
Oh, yeah.
With lawmakers trying to decide if they should fund these checks.
Especially with everything else going on.
Yeah, with the tax cuts and the deficit.
Right, it could be a total mess.
And then you have these DOGE checks.
With Trump's name on them.
Showing up in people's mailboxes.
Right, the middle of all this.
It's a powerful image.
It is.
And it could really influence how people feel about things.
Definitely.
It's like economics and politics and public opinion are all mixed up together.
They are.
It's hard to know what's going to happen.
Yeah, but it's definitely something to watch.
For sure. It brings up some really big questions.
Like what?
Like, what's the role of government? And how do we balance all these different things?
Yeah, like spending and saving.
And helping people and being fiscally responsible.
It's complicated.
And then how much does public opinion matter?
It matters a lot.
Especially when it comes to making policies.
For sure.
Wow, we've really gotten into some deep stuff here.
We have.
I think we've done a good job of breaking down some of the complexity.
I hope so.
But before we move on, I want to talk about one more thing.
Okay.
The media.
Oh, yes.
It seems like this whole DOGE dividend story is made for the media.
It does.
You have money and power and famous people.
And controversy.
It's like a reality show.
Yeah.
With Trump and Musk as the main characters.
And the American people are watching.
But what do you think the media's role is in all this?
It's a complicated role.
Do they make things more confusing?
They can, but they can also help clarify things.
Okay.
On the one hand, they can bring attention to important issues.
Right.
They can hold powerful people accountable.
Uh-huh.
And they can give different people a voice.
So they're important.
They are.
But on the other hand...
They can sometimes make things seem more sensational than they are.
Right.
They can oversimplify things.
And they can have their own biases.
Exactly, which can make it hard for people to understand what's really going on.
So it's kind of a mixed bag.
It is.
It's up to us to be smart about the news we consume.
Absolutely.
To think critically.
And to question what we hear.
And to get our information from lots of different sources.
That's really important.
It's more important than ever to be media literate.
I agree.
To know the difference between facts and opinions. And to be able to spot fake news and propaganda.
And to form our own opinions based on all that.
Yeah, it's a lot of responsibility.
It is, but it's important.
I think that's a good point to keep in mind.
Yeah.
As we continue this deep dive into DOGE dividends.
For sure.
There's so much to consider.
It is.
And so much at stake.
Absolutely.
But if we stay informed.
Yeah.
And talk about these things.
And hold our leaders accountable.
We can hopefully figure out how to deal with all this.
And create a better future.
For everyone.
Right.
So we've really gone deep on this whole DOGE dividend thing.
We have.
From that initial buzz when the idea first came out to now talking about, what it could mean for the economy and for politics. It's clear that there's no easy answer.
Definitely not. There's so much to consider.
It really shows you how important it is to think critically.
Especially these days.
When we're constantly being hit with information.
From all sides.
It can be hard to know what to believe.
You really have to be able to look at things closely.
Yeah.
Question what you hear.
And really try to understand where the information is coming from.
And what the biases might be.
And form your own opinions based on all that.
That's right.
Especially with something like these DOGE dividends.
Where there are strong arguments on both sides.
And where the potential consequences are really significant.
You have to weigh the potential benefits against the potential risks.
Right, and think about the long-term effects.
And how different groups of people would be affected.
Before we wrap up, I want to go back to something we talked about earlier.
Okay.
You know, the origin of this DOGE idea.
Right, Jamie Fishback.
The CEO of Azoria.
The investment fund.
He seems to be the one who really got this whole thing started.
He even calculated how much each household could get.
Oh, yeah, like $5,000?
Something like that if Musk actually finds those $2 trillion in savings.
Wow. And he pitched it directly to Musk on X?
He did, saying that taxpaying households should receive $1 for every $5 of total savings that DOGE delivers.
And what did Musk say to that?
Just, we'll check with the president.
And, well, we know how the president feels about it.
He's on board.
It's amazing how fast this idea took off.
It is.
From a social media post to a real policy proposal.
It shows you how powerful ideas can be.
And how influential people like Musk and Trump are.
It's important to pay attention to where ideas come from.
Yeah, and who's pushing them.
And what their motivations might be.
It's all about understanding the whole picture.
The context.
The players involved.
And what they might be trying to achieve.
And that's why these deep dives are so important.
They give us a chance to really examine these complicated issues.
From different angles.
And to hear different perspectives.
So we can make up our own minds.
Exactly.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive on DOGE dividends, I want to leave everyone with something to think about.
Okay.
Considering everything we've talked about today.
All the pros and cons.
The economic realities.
The political motivations.
And all the ethical questions.
Right.
Do you think these DOGE dividend checks are a good idea? Are they a real solution to government waste?
Or are they just a flashy idea that won't really work?
It's a question we all have to answer for ourselves.
Based on our own values and what we think is important.
There's no right or wrong answer.
But by having these conversations.
Questioning what we hear.
And by looking at things from different perspectives,
we can start to understand the challenges we're facing.
And hopefully find ways to make things better.
Well said, well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone.
It was great to be here.
And we'll be back soon with another topic to explore.
Sounds good.
See you then.